good. So we'll get started here at 1:32. I know people will kind of start to pile in, but thank you guys. Thank everyone that's already on. We'll start to have people trickle in. The whole webinar is around the business case for connected devices. As far as just a quick agenda, we'll do welcome and intros, which we're already into the full swing of. We'll cover a few just kind of hot topics in the industry, just a general IoT industry update and what we're seeing in the market today, which will be led by Harald and his team. Then we'll turn it over to Kurt and focus on data as the foundation for your connected products. Obviously, doing something with your data and how you pull that data is super important. And there's many things you can do once you get it. We'll also talk through some of that and also the foundations of tech enablement, which will also be led by Kurt. And then we'll cover off on monetization and just some of the business models. Obviously, please keep submitting questions. We did have some already come through the chat here as we were getting things loaded in, but we'll use Q&A as a way to get to keep things interactive. So yeah, looking forward to having this. This is one of the many marketing and content opportunities and a great partnership between the York Group and Mesh Systems. So without further ado, let's start to meet the panelists. So we have Harald Horgen, who has over 30 years in the technology sector. He's a seasoned consultant and strategist and focus a lot on the software companies, OEMs, and machine builders that want to thrive in the competitive and dynamic market. His team and him have worked with companies like ABB, Microsoft, Ericsson, Danfoss, Schneider Electric, and many others. So Harald, I know this is a Mesh-led webinar, but you play a key role in this. So we welcome you today and thanks for taking part. All right, and next are the world famous, at least in our eyes and in our hearts, Kurt Newens. Kurt is the VP of Product and Strategy at Mesh. He's been at Mesh for 3 years. In his early years was focused on his efforts at ABB and Kohler, focused on product management, platforming, and even into the artificial intelligence. We're lucky to have had Kurt, like I said, for 3 years to help us grow our product strategy and how we look to weave the unique skills that AI and data can provide in a connected product journey. So Kurt, thanks for taking part in this today. All right, well, it wouldn't be a webinar with a quick little overview of Mesh Systems, the host here. Mesh has been in the IoT and connected product space for over 20 years. Not only just thought leadership on the engineering and product side, but really the focus on expertise across applications, many different types of cloud infrastructure and hardware. And as we talked about in the beginning, a really big focus on a wide range of customers from the SMC, scaling, and even enterprise customers. But that end-to-end ecosystem is where we really focus on. And our journey here has been a lot has been focused on not only just how do we get something concept or how do we get it in kind of that MVP POC phase, but our big focus over the past 20 years is how do we help companies take things into commercialization. So oftentimes when you do these webinars and you're kicking around the idea, we talk about like, why are we here today? We've recognized that IoT is just a business revolution, not just a technology revolution. Obviously, as you're seeing in the world today, technology tends to be leading the charge for that revolution. But what we always talk about is pulling it all together is what really makes the magic happen. We are lucky enough to have a spokesperson on Mesh Systems team that the famous Ron Burgundy. So he was able to kind of endorse this webinar and our approach to business. So we're happy to have Ron take part and appreciate the quote. So I'm going to flip it over to Harald here to walk through a little bit of just the overview on the York Group, how we see sort of the marriage and mesh of Mesh Systems and York Group as far as business models and keep things rolling. So Harald, why don't you take it from here, my friend?
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, so as Dan mentioned, we have 30 years of experience in working with technology companies on go-to-market business models with a very strong focus on as-a-service business models, moving enterprise software companies from perpetual on-premise licenses and now machine builders and manufacturers that are building out IoT solutions, equipment as a service. And we're very excited about the partnership with Mesh because as I've worked with dozens and dozens of some of the world's largest machine builders, what we've found is that there are two sides of the equation. There's the technology enablement, which is building out the solutions and making sure that that works properly. But as important is the business model and making sure that they have the right go-to-market strategy, monetization, and also the internal alignment of the organization to get the right buy-in from every part of the organization around the strategic importance of connected products and how to take that to market. So why are companies building connected products? And we see right now that there's a difference in the adoption rate. Many of the large companies have already been doing this. Now we're seeing a lot of mid-sized companies doing it. And there are a number of reasons for that. First of all, it represents a new potential revenue stream and recurring revenue stream. For some companies that have large complex equipment and many times located in remote parts of the world, it's very expensive to send people on site to do the field services, and being able to manage and monitor the equipment remotely is a way of reducing those costs. It's also a great way to build out a stronger relationship with your customer, providing insights into their business that moves you from being simply a supplier of hardware to being a trusted advisor in the overall business. Increasingly, connected products are a way to drive an advantage compared to the competition. The companies that are able to connect their equipment and sometimes their competitors' equipment to drive the insights for the customers move up in terms of the value proposition and the quality of the relationship with their customers. And finally, having connected products gives you great insight into how your products actually work in a production environment, the things that you can do to drive product improvement and make the underlying hardware more competitive. And there are a lot of different use cases. Not every OEM or machine builder has a product that's well adapted to connectivity and a business model, but in most cases, you can find a way to drive that value. The types of use cases that we found are high value products. For example, DMG Mori sells very expensive machine tool equipment, 200, 300,000 euros. And being able to monitor that and the impact of potential downtime for the customer drives tremendous value. Then there's equipment that requires a lot of either on-site support, or in many cases, there's a consumables element that you can now manage and monitor and drive a better ROI for the customers. One of the companies that we worked with is a packaging company specialized in pulp and paper, and a lot of their equipment was located in the jungles of Borneo and Brazil. And for them, being able to monitor the equipment and in many cases remediate problems remotely was a great way to reduce the cost of providing that customer support. We've also worked with companies that have products with safety implications. 3M, for example, has respiratory masks for employees in high-risk environments. And there's a real problem for these companies in having the employees fit the mask properly. If they don't fit the mask properly, then they're not getting the full benefit. So by using IoT and connectivity, they were able to monitor how the employees were using it and then go in and train them to fit the mask properly. And then some equipment by itself on a standalone basis, a pump or a compressor, for example, might not have a huge amount of value in doing the connectivity, but if that piece of equipment is part of a larger process, and if that piece of equipment, if it goes down, it impacts the rest of the production chain, then it becomes increasingly important to make sure that you're monitoring and eliminating the downtime for that equipment. And it really is starting to become about the data. It's not the product itself. The product is simply becoming the vehicle that generates the data, and the value that you create for yourself and for your customers come from that data. And I'll lay the foundation for this, but to really explain the importance and how data is impacting the business model, let's look at where companies are today. Manufacturers, machine builders, traditional OEMs, today they're manufacturing products, they're sometimes attaching services to that. And where the market is today is in this spot, where people are adding sensors to their devices, they're collecting the data, they're developing baseline applications around predictive maintenance, condition monitoring, perhaps energy management. And this is where most of the market for machine builders is today. But where the industry is going is taking the data that you collect from these devices and starting to deliver outcomes. And that can be outcomes based on the productivity, the output from the customer. It could be equipment as a service. But this is the longer term trend of where the industry is going. So where we are today is driving that connectivity, but what you're doing is creating an install base, a user base that generates enough data to eventually fine-tune the model and add additional value for the customers. But every machine builder has to make the decision that's right for them. There are those companies that have this vision of in 10 years becoming equipment as a service and fundamentally changing their business model, but that's not the right approach for everyone. And what we found is that companies tend to align along 5 different stages of progression. There are some companies that have looked at this and said, look, it's not for us. For whatever reason, we can't build a business case for connected products. That's fine if that's the right decision for you. Some companies are being reactive because their competition is doing it. In order to remain competitive, they also need to do it, but they're actually reacting to what the competition is doing rather than having a longer term strategy. Then the tactical are the companies that are saying, let's use this as a way of reducing our costs, our field services costs, making it very operational, just improving their profitability. Then there are the companies in the next step in the value chain are the ones that are using this to drive new business, either with existing companies, upselling and cross-selling to existing customers, or they're using it as a way to get a foothold with brand new customers and taking market share away from their customers. And then finally, they're the ones that are completely transforming their business model and looking at the longer term 10-year vision of where they think the industry is going, how they provide more value to their customers, tie the relationships together much more strongly. And again, it's up to you to find out where you belong on this. There's no right answer for every company. Not every company needs to be fully transformed. For some companies, it's like, let's just be very practical. Let's reduce our field services costs. And that's what lays the foundation for the ROI. But it is about data. And one of the companies I worked with was Shell Oil. And then funnily enough, they used data is the new oil as the analogy. But it is a really good visual analogy of what's happening. So if data is the new oil, then the sensors that are attached to the equipment, that's really the wellhead. That's where the data comes from. IoT is the pipeline that transfers that data, transports the data from the point of origin to someplace else where you're going to add value. And that is really where the value is created. That's the refinery. That's building the application that uses the data as a way of driving more value. And this is where companies can really spend a lot of time, and where a partner like Mesh plays a really important role in figuring out, so what are the applications that we can apply? What are the analytics? Do we need machine learning in there? How do we take the data that we're collecting from all of these devices and create more value-added solutions that we can sell back to our customers, improve their operations, and again, improve the quality of the overall relationship. And as these applications are being built out, it's important to understand where in the organization you're selling, who you're selling it to, and what's the value proposition for those customers. And this is the underlying theme, I think, of today's webinar, is that the business models of the future are really going to be based on the data. And if it's based on data, then the key is finding the ways to drive adoption of your connected devices, drive as much data transfer as possible, as long as that data can be useful. We've seen many cases where companies are collecting a lot of unnecessary data. It's going into a data lake. It just sits there, and they haven't found a way to use it. So you have to balance the need to develop those value-added applications with the cost of transferring, transporting, and storing that data, and make sure that it's a practical business purpose for what you're doing. And data has different levels of value. For some companies, they just want to collect the data. They don't really have a strategy or a process in place to monetize the data through analytics or applications, but they are collecting data. And there is an increasing number of data marketplaces where you can, on an anonymized basis, contribute your data and the data sets that you're collecting. And then there are companies that come in and they subscribe to that. They collect your data along with others. They aggregate that data and use the larger data set to create new solutions. And you're simply getting a royalty based on the value of the data that you're contributing. And then we get into analytics, which tends to be more tactical, operational, managing the uptime, the energy management. And then the next level of value is actually building out applications on that data. And then finally, for some companies, it is building out an entire platform. So DMG Mori, for example, with their machine tools, they built an operating system that is delivered with the equipment that is the platform. And then they have a whole portfolio of individual applications that sit on top of that. And they now built themselves out as a platform company with solutions. That platform that they built out, they can use that to collaborate with other companies that don't have a similar technology and build out a larger ecosystem that then on a combined basis can have a real impact on their customers. And we're reaching an inflection point. We've been very slow, and I think, in adopting connected products, and there's been some frustration around that. And we're seeing a number of factors now that are driving that adoption. First of all, we're seeing the impact of full transformation in the car industry. And as a market segment, it is a really good illustration of the power of Industry 4.0 and connectivity. We're seeing an increasing number of large machine builders that are having an impact, and they're now becoming a model for the next tier down to say, okay, this works. We really need to look at developing a strategy and building out our connected products. And increasingly, customers are demanding from their vendors that they have connected products, either because they're going through their own Industry 4.0 digital transformation and connectivity as a key to vendor selection, or there are Mesh and we have a joint customer where the customer said, we want you to build a connected version of this product. The customer, the manufacturer asked, well, why? And the customer said, we don't know yet, but we know that we need the data. And once we have the data, we'll find a way to use it. But we know that we need these devices fully connected. And then the final element is that company like Mesh is now a proven partner. 5 or 6 years ago, building your own custom version was really the only option. But now companies like Mesh can provide a strategy, they can provide the technology and the skill set to de-risk the investment and accelerate the time to value. So what I've given you, I think, a fairly quick overview of where the industry is going, why connected products make sense. And now we're going to get into the how portion of this webinar, and we'll turn this over to Mesh, where they can talk about the how on the technology side.
Thank you, Harold. And it's always, we obviously didn't collaborate. No, I'm just kidding. We spent a lot of time planning this, but it is great to hear, a lot of the talk track that you're seeing across the industry align with how we think about it. We're talking a lot internally just of this, the evolution, I would say, of, IoT 1.0, which is really about connect my device. And now it's all about that kind of 2.0 model of how do we actually do something with it. And I know Kurt's going to talk quite a bit around just that product journey and what this looks like in the real world. So Kurt, I'm gonna turn it over to you to keep us rolling.
Great, thanks, Dan. All right, so today I'm going to share where to focus when leading a new connected product initiative. And the reason why I'm excited to talk about this today is I've spent the majority of my career on the technology enablement side, focused on empowering connected product companies to deliver a solution to the market. And what we've found over and over again, everywhere I've worked or role that I've had, is that if there's not clarity at an early stage and consistently throughout the initiative, the solution will fail. So you can get the, you can get the infrastructure right, you can get security, scalability, everything built in, but if you're not focused on where that value is, then you're bound for some failure there. So I find it helpful to split connected products into two distinct layers. One is the IoT layer, and the other is the application layer. So on the IoT layer side, so this is where a lot of Mesh's expertise is. It is how do you connect, monitor, and manage devices, as well as the underlying infrastructure, which allows that type of solution data from the customer's devices to land and then build value on top of that. And we see many customers really using this as the common starting point. They're going to connect their machine, but they're not exactly sure what to do with it. And what I would argue is all the value is built on top of that, and you can focus much earlier in your journey, before you even connect your machines, how to find those actionable insights, deliver that to the various users of your solution to deliver value. And once you've validated that, then you can go back and have a really strong base and foundation for your solution to take it throughout that journey from the pilot to production and scale it up. So at Mesh, we have conversations with customers every day who are going from that early stage ideation, and then they recognize, hey, there's some form of an early stage commercial pilot that they're going to need to launch. Then eventually they want to move to production. So what I want to hit on today is I do not see enough business value experimentation prior to this pilot stage. So you can build experiments and prototypes at very early stages to have a really strong opinion on what the value of your solution could be. And what that allows you to do with the stakeholders inside your organization is have a long-term vision and support for your initiative, as opposed to build it and then the customers will come later. So I want to take an example just to ground this in a real solution. So imagine that you are an OEM of an espresso machine. We call these solution providers at Mesh, and they're our direct customers most of the time. And imagine that that solution's goal is to sell solutions to their target end customers who are operators of coffee shops with at least 10 espresso machines. Every IoT solution or connected product that I've been involved in has both internal and external users of the data where you're trying to get value on top of. So one internal use case that's very common, and Harald alluded to this, was machine companies wanting to offer a better support mechanism for maintenance, whether that's predictive or reducing the time to react to issues in the field. And this really is the seed for the as a service business model, machine as a service or espresso as a service. Getting this right is really valuable. And the people who usually look at that data work inside the organization. Now, you also have external users and use cases, and one for coffee shops would be, if you have multiple coffee shops, how do you ensure that your espresso quality is consistent across all of these? And really, any IoT solution that we're talking about, whether it's a coffee machine, an oven, a motor, pump, you're going to connect those devices, you're going to have some cloud infrastructure, and then that application layer on top of that, whether that's a web, mobile app, or some other form of an interface, is where that value is delivered. And that's what I'm talking about here. So if I was responsible, let's say for product at that espresso machine manufacturer, what I would do is I would start by laying out all the outcomes that we want to deliver and believe are possible with this connected solution, both internally and externally. So I'll take one of them and I'll go through an example of how I would do this. So let's go back to that example of, you want to maximize the consistency of espresso across all the coffee shops across your customer base. So where I would start is find the experts who you would trust, the best of the best, who could deliver that outcome if they had the right insights and tools available to them. So you might have inside your company, a scientist who's expert on espresso, and they know what temperature it needs to be in the grounds and everything like that. And then since you manufacture the machines, you have expertise on the actual machine itself. And sometimes these experts will be inside your company, and sometimes it'll be with your customers. Talk to them. And what you can do when you talk to them, you can say, if your job was responsible for maximizing the consistency of, espresso across a variety of machines, like you're responsible for that outcome, what insights and tools did you need to be able to accomplish that? And then you can get down into, like a common example would be, what are the configurations and settings on all the machines? Are they all on the same firmware? Is it the same hardware platform? If our customers are having that consistently across their devices, are they actually operating in the expected ranges that we would expect? So ask each one of those experts to provide all that information to you. And then finally, you can get to the point where you're looking at the data, or perhaps the curated data on top of the raw data here. So for example, in IoT, a lot of times we see these dashboards where customers will connect machines, and then our solution providers will connect their machines, and they'll build these dashboards that have all these time series charts and KPIs. And what they're really relying on is a user who is an expert of that system, who can then parse through all the data and make decisions on that. What I'm arguing is, if you talk to the experts at an early stage, you can actually take that raw data and put it into a format where insights can be generated not just by the highest experts of the system, but those sort of the average user. So an example of that would be, instead of showing temperature every minute across all of your machines during their cycle, what if instead you counted the brew cycles outside of an acceptable temperature range to know where to look, and then you could dive deeper into the data to generate more insights. So how could you go about validating this once you've had these conversations across these different outcomes you want to deliver? So the first thing that I would do, and we've been doing this here at Mesh, is start with generating simulated or synthetic data based on these conversations you're having. You don't need to start with connecting your device. Start with what data you think you can capture and generate that in a way that's realistic based on what you would see in the field. Curate that data in a format based on what the experts were telling you was important to them. And then you can build these really efficient dashboards really quickly to provide an opinion on how to deliver those outcomes and bring those experts back in and iterate with them on, is this useful? What changes would you make? And then also bring in people who aren't that deep of experts and see if you can close that gap between the outcomes that an expert could provide and the more average user. And one of the things that I've been really excited about over the past year is how you can start to apply AI to these solutions. And what I mean by this is if you have data and you know the curation of that data that an expert would use to solve a given problem, you can leverage generative AI to then have an opinion and act as a reasoning engine, and then crack open all of these different forms of user interfaces, applications, and user experience that weren't possible before. In the past, in IoT, it's again to all those dashboards and data points that overwhelm users, but now you can start to generate your opinion on what they should do and feed that to them in natural language. And once you do this, I'll argue it's much easier to justify the investments of a connected product, and you can get that real data, leverage what you've already built in these inexpensive dashboards, and then this experimentation in AI, and then continue to iterate on it because you've already have a feel for where the value is, as opposed to training your early users on this overwhelming amount of data. And instead, you can show them the value from day one instead of doing that while in the field. So really the through line here is if you are a solution provider, focus on where you add domain expertise. It's where all the value is in your connected solutions. Be as opinionated as possible of how you deliver those outcomes in your software. And then once you have that right, then figure out how to get that foundation rock solid so it's scalable, it evolves, it's secure. And that's where mesh systems expertise is. So you can go and do that yourselves. Or if you're having a little trouble of how to experiment with value, we have a lot of tools and capabilities to help you there. Again, we don't have the expertise in your domain, but we can ask some questions that could help you and show you some tools and capabilities that could help you later on. So Dan, you want to take over?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks, Kurt. As a company, 19 or nearly 20 years in this industry, we've seen a lot of these patterns, and as Harald alluded to, I mean, so we've already kind of walked through a little bit of just where the industry's at, the value of data. Kurt even talked a little about how AI can help you on the data side, but really more importantly on that, what is that connected product journey? And so wanted to round this out of so much of connecting your products is obviously on making that connection, but it also can really change your business. And so I'm going to kick it back over to Harald just to talk through some of the best practices that he's seen and how this can help to start to evolve your business just in a greater way. So Harald, I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks. Yeah, and so what I want to do now is just go through the best practices around the business model. And as I go through this, I want to emphasize that we're not suggesting that companies change their entire business model. You still are a manufacturer, and that's going to drive your business. But what I'll go through are the business model elements that will drive the connected solutions and the as a service, which will be a subset of your overall organization, and how that can be integrated into your business. So here are the concerns that we both Mesh and we talked to a lot of machine builders, and there's still a lot of skepticism, and it's justified. Some of the concerns that companies have are, well, our customers aren't asking for connected devices. They're not going through Industry 4.0. We're still going through relatively slow adoption. If you go back and look at what Gartner predicted 6 or 7 years ago, we're not quite where they expected us to be. It's not a simple job to build this out. It does take time. It does take investment. This is building out a new product set. And within a lot of companies, it's just resistance. There's the people that are selling the hardware, selling your current solutions today. They don't want to be distracted from what drives their compensation, drives the organization, drives the overall business today. But at the same time, if it's a publicly held company, there's a tremendous amount of pressure from investors to do something. You need to have a digital strategy. You need to have something that shows that you're thinking about the future. And also internally, the stakeholders, there are within every company, there's some group of people are saying the future is data, the future is connectivity. And there's a lot of pressure internally to start driving that thinking. But I think that for most machine builders that have a significant size, they need to be thinking about a data-driven journey and connected products, because that is what is going to redefine their business and enhance their likelihood of being a successful manufacturer. The ones that don't do it are going to become suppliers of hardware, commodity hardware, at the lowest possible price. But again, a lot of customers are skeptical about this. And I think this is one of the biggest barriers to adopting it, is the questions that you get from customers. They don't want to send data to the cloud. They don't want to change what they're doing today. They've been doing the same thing for the last 30 years, and it's a lot of resistance to changing that. Many customers don't have budget for transformation, and they don't know what the ROI is going to be. So you have to make a compelling business case. You're not only convincing your own organization and your own internal structure, but you also have to sell that message to your customers. So how do you drive that adoption? Well, one thing we found is that if you're selling compressors and you now start shipping connectable compressors and you're replacing the end of life, those few compressors that you're delivering by themselves aren't enough justification for the customer to connect and start sending data. And a lot of times it's to start with existing data. The customers have 20 years of SCADA data, they've got PLC data, and there's a lot that you can do with their existing data to show the value. And when you're doing that, start shipping so that you're installing the connected devices, whether or not they connect them. Show the value from what they have today, the older equipment that generates enough data that you can do something meaningful. Start replacing the third generation, the older generation, with the new devices. And then have a strategy internally of making sure that you can connect to the older equipment so that you're providing a larger footprint to your customers. Again, if they're only replacing 5 or 10% of the device fleet, that isn't going to change their behavior. But if you can expand that and now you're monitoring 30 to 40 to 50% of their devices, then it becomes more meaningful. And there's a reason for them to start changing their processes to incorporate the connectivity. And then where possible, connect with your competitors' devices. European Union just came out with new legislation that mandates that companies and manufacturers open up their PLCs and their equipment to third parties. So they can no longer ring fence their devices and make it difficult or impossible for other companies to access that data. The machine builder that ultimately connects to and controls and monitors not just their equipment, but their competitors' equipment is going to become the winner in this game. If you don't do it, somebody else will. So what are the business model issues? And it is a different business model. It's no longer cost plus. It's not the top line revenues, gross margin. There are other metrics that go into this. So let's look at the pricing. We'll look at the KPIs and metrics. We'll look at how the sales organization changes. We'll talk about marketing. And I'm just going to go very quickly through 1 or 2 slides on each of these topics, but to frame what the changes are and why the changes need to be made. Customer support changes, and then that has an impact on the organizational structure. So let's look at pricing, and you'll be getting a link to this, and I could probably get a copy of the deck, so I won't go through this in detail, but there are a lot of different pricing models when you're doing things as a service. There are some very valid free usage models like freemium that drives an install base and gives you the foundation for data collection that allows you to then go back and provide value-added services. DMG Mori was an example. They deliver the operating system and the platform as part of the equipment when they deliver it, and then they make their money from adding the applications that sit on top of that. More and more we're seeing metric-based pricing because that becomes a real value-driven pricing model for the end user customer. And that can be the number of devices that are being monitored, the amount of data that's being collected. There are different metrics that can be used. And then monthly subscriptions, whether that is per unit, is an overall price. Monthly subscriptions are really a key component of the as a service, even if the contracts are written with annual payments. That's just a difference in the payment modality as opposed to the pricing structure. Revenue sharing or cost sharing, that's when you move towards an outcomes-based business model. If that can be measured and managed, then a lot of times the business models are moving towards, well, we can reduce your cost by 5% or 6% or whatever that number is, and then sharing a percentage of those cost savings. So the message here on the pricing is that you need to look at value-based pricing, tie the pricing model to the benefit that you're driving for your customer. But there are a lot of different options available. And then metrics change. Again, you're not really, well, you are focused on revenues. It's always when we focus on revenues, but there are other metrics that are more important to monitor to make sure that you are getting the profitability and the return that you need. So monthly recurring revenues, that's what the monthly equivalent of the subscription is, whether it's done on a monthly, quarterly, or annual basis, is, for example, $1,000 per month. The annual contract value is simply 12 times that. So the annual contract value, whether you're collecting it monthly, quarterly, or annually, would be $12,000 per year. The total contract value is if you're signing a longer term agreement. So if you're signing a 3-year contract, then the total contract value would be $36,000. Now, in terms of revenues, you're only booking the monthly revenue because in a SaaS model, in an as a service model, you can only book the revenues as a service is being provisioned. When you're selling a piece of equipment for $100,000, you book that revenue. If you're selling a $100,000 3-year contract, you're still only booking the revenue on a monthly basis. And the LTV is the lifetime value of that customer relationship. How long will the customer continue to use your as a service offering? Is it 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? That is something that you won't know until you've actually had the experience of maintaining those customers for many, many years. And then other key metrics that you don't see as much with hardware is a churn rate. The customers that renew and continue to use your product or don't. And if you start seeing 10, 15, 20, 30% of the customers that sign up for the as a service offering initially stop doing it, then you need to find out why, because the attrition rate from customers has a huge impact in the long-term buildup of those recurring revenues. And then the final element is the customer acquisition cost. How much are you investing upfront to onboard those customers? Okay, so the sales function. This is probably the biggest change for organizations because they find out that their hardware salespeople like to get a commission on a big contract, and they're not really excited about collecting a commission on something that's done on a monthly basis. And one of the questions that we deal with very often is, can you continue to use the same salespeople, or do you need a different sales organization? And the key element here is, how strategic is this as a service business model for you? The more strategic it is, the more important it is that you get your existing salespeople on board to help drive those sales to the existing customers. The more opportunistic it is, the less important it is in your overall business model, the less important it is to keep them on board. And there are different ways of impacting the salespeople. And you've probably experienced this if you have anything as a service. Your salespeople simply don't want to learn something new. They don't want to go out and sell something for $29 per device per month. Doesn't really impact their revenue quota. So you can manage that by either setting different quotas where they have 2 separate quotas that they need to achieve in order to hit their bonuses. You can start adjusting the commissions so that they don't get the full commission on their hardware side until they retire a certain quota on the as a service side of it. There's different ways of playing with it, but it is just in general very difficult to motivate and incentivize the existing salespeople, and very often you end up with a different digital sales team to focus on the subscriptions. And once you move into the subscription model, the sales roles change as well. You will have the hunters that go out and close the deal. That could be existing key account managers. That could be a new specialized digital salesperson. And then you have the farmers that are responsible for maintaining the relationship, ensuring renewals and upsells and cross-sells to existing subscription customers to increase the total contract value, the lifetime value of those customers. Marketing goes through a fundamental change as well. In the traditional marketing and sales funnel, you use marketing to drive leads at the top of the funnel. When those leads come in, they go to the sales team, and the sales team handles most of the qualification, walking the customer through the sales process and closing the deals. In digital solutions and subscriptions, marketing tends to take on a much more important role, where you're trying to do more of the, not just driving the funnel, but also doing the qualification of prospects through the marketing process to drive down that customer acquisition cost. And the sales team only gets involved at the last end to close the sale. And this all ties into automation. Automation in a subscription world is really important because you're collecting money or booking revenues on a monthly basis, you want to try and align the cost of acquiring and maintaining those customers with the revenue stream that you're booking. So automating this through digital marketing to bring people to a website, using the website as much as possible to drive the customer conversion, to get them to sign up. Ideally, they can conclude the entire sales cycle online, and then using an automated portal to manage the customers once they've signed up for the contract. And the customer service is also impacted. Most companies do have a customer service. There are questions that come up. You have your field services group. In a digital as a service business model, there's a different perspective. So if you're selling something today on a here's the contract, here's the equipment, here's the software license up front, then what you typically want to do is use the services department as a profit center. So if you're collecting a services contract of 10, 12, 15% per year to maintain that equipment, then you want to make sure that you are providing the level of service the customer needs, but leaving money left over. So the field services aspect is usually a profit center. In an as a service business model, the customer service is seen as part of the ongoing sales process. And it's a zero profit business, because what you're doing with your field services, your customer success management, is maintaining the relationship and starting to add more revenues from the existing customers. So it's more important to add more revenue, more usage for your as a service, where they connect more products, they add more users, they expand to additional plants, whatever. And that's the role. And so you're not necessarily looking at the services contract as a way of generating additional profit, but you're using whatever that cash flow is from the services to drive additional revenues from those customers. So what are some of the biggest differences? One is that even though you are potentially collecting on a monthly basis or booking the revenues on a monthly basis, the customers still expect the same level of support as if they were paying upfront for the contract. More and more customers want fast response. In a SaaS model and an as a service model, there's expectation that if they have a query, they're going to get an answer right away. And a lot of this is done through mobile platforms. So it's really important to have that developed as part of the application, where customers can use their phone. If they see a problem, they get a notification, they can click on a button and they get support from the back end, whether that is a live technician, is a chat, or something that's web-based. And the other thing is that the support now moves very often. These large customers have an internal engineering team that will provide the first line of support. When you're in an as a service, you're connecting directly with the end user, and the end user is going to be sending those customers. So now you find yourself dealing with what we affectionately call the idiot end user, and they don't have high level technical questions. They're calling to say, how do I change this field from yellow to green? And so you have to have a support organization that's designed to provide that. And you wouldn't use your engineers and your senior staff to answer basic questions around the functionality of the product. So that is a quick walk through some of the business model changes. Again, I want to emphasize that you're not changing the entire organization. You are a manufacturer. That is your bread and butter. And we're not suggesting that you change that organization. What we're suggesting is that there are elements of an as a service business model that require a separate structure, and that you want to leverage your existing infrastructure to support the evolution of your revenues from the digital services, and finding that balance. And as you've seen now from my little discourse and from Kurt, it is a combination of both the technology side and the business side. And you have to solve for both sides of this equation in order to develop a successful as a product business model.
Makes sense. Yeah. Thank you so much, Harold. And yeah, it's almost like you're shifting a little bit of your identity. It's not necessarily your core business, right? I mean, there's different ways to transact, and yeah, so awesome perspective. I always said if we're going to take, 45 minutes, it'd be good to kind of have some keys to the webinar or keys to the game. But thank you both, Kurt and Harold, for your perspective. So the first thing is just when we look at this, IoT is a journey. It requires planning, expertise, to both Harold and Kurt's points, oftentimes partners, and then management. It's one thing to get something up off the ground in a lab or in a small kind of confined pilot, but as your business continues to grow, as digital transformation starts to happen, you need to make sure that you have the right competencies, team, vendors, partners to really support that growth, because once things get going, your business does just look that much different. Also, just start with the end in mind. Kurt talked a lot about looking at the business outcomes you want to drive, and Harold talked a lot about the business models and how you can start to think a little differently. But oftentimes, these products or projects are very engineering led, which I work with hundreds of engineers. It's not always a bad thing, but you got to think about, hey, what are the business outcomes you really want to be able to drive, and then start to work your way back. And both Kurt and Harold alluded to and talked to, we'll use the data as the new oil for driving value creation. But we talk a lot about internally, like I said, that transformation from IoT 1.0 was connect my device, we'll figure it out. 2.0, Harold, as you talked about, a lot of is now we have to do something with that data, whether it's monetize it, use it more properly, And so it's an important part of using that, and having that data yourself allows you to have the right strategy and success, and then pass it down to your customers or whomever the next person is. So that's at least from just a quick webinar content. I did want to, we've got a couple just upcoming. We're going to have another one of these webinars and white papers coming out around IoT solution management and just how we think about managing devices at scale. We've got a few more that are on the line as far as just the solution journey that Kurt talked about, a little bit of a deep dive. I don't know what we're calling all in on AI for IoT and how to actually use that in your business. And then, we've almost been around for 20 years. We've got a lot of insights and interesting perspective. So we've had quite a bit of Q&A start to come together. I'm going to play a little bit of I'll dish these out where appropriate. So we had one question, what are your thoughts and comments on solution providers and manufacturers and end users with the buy versus build IoT platform question? Kurt, I know it's something we've run into quite a bit. Just would be curious on kind of your perspective on that buy versus build and how you should be thinking about the different perspective there.
Yeah, it's going to depend on the needs of your organization. I would say this: bet on the technologies that are going to last, and you can build with a partner who has deep domain expertise there. I would go against building everything from scratch that does not provide differentiating value to you. So if you start with, as I mentioned before, if you start with the business value of your solution and you have a strong opinion on which technologies are critical and which partners are critical there, that's the place to start. And some people have built on top of that, which is a good bet. And oftentimes we see other people who decide to build the minimum amount necessary to be useful.
Awesome. Thank you, Kurt. One of the questions we had, and Harold, this probably aligns better with your side, is just what's the typical time to revenue when you're starting to look at these different outcomes and solutions as they're coming together?
Yeah, so there are two parts of that cycle. The first cycle is the actual technology development, and then it's the go-to-market. So if we pick it up from where the devices have been developed and you're going to market, then you're looking at a 6 to 12 month cycle to get the first customers on board. And it's important to identify and select the first customers. And that's where you start to prove out your business model. You get some references. So 6 to 12 months to get the first revenues, and then the next 12-month period is when you can really start to scale it out. So you add in the technology side, and what we're seeing more and more is that companies want to solve for both sides of this. Initially, that was the customer that we worked together on, where they knew that they needed to develop the connected products, and they were mapping that out. But at the same time, they wanted to understand what the go-to-market implications were, how to set up the organization so that when the products came online, they would be able to go to market very quickly. Many companies that we've worked with did the technology part of it, and then they didn't get the revenues that they expected. And then we've come back in and then worked with them on the go-to-market strategy. And of course, that really delays the revenue buildup. So to the extent that companies can think through both the product infrastructure as well as the business model and the internal infrastructure to make that happen, it will allow them to achieve the revenue rate a little bit faster.
Perfect. Thank you, Harold. All right, Kurt. I kind of hard to have these. Seems like a one answer, but when we're talking about in your experience, what is the most important activity or task in that kind of pre-planning or conceptual phase of a connected product that you can start to look at? I know you talked about a little bit, but love a little more context from one of the questions from the crowd.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I start with as narrowly defined outcomes that you can deliver as a business. I think if you start too high level with sort of lofty business model needs, you're going to then jump from there to what data can make that happen. If you instead focus on what value can you provide to your customers and your solution very early, once you're providing value, then you can focus on things like business model and technology choices and things like that.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. And then one of the questions here, I guess, to be more directed to you. What are you seeing different geographies that are starting to take up these connected solutions? I don't know, across the globe, or are there any areas that you've seen more of an emphasis?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because we see cultural differences. The US is much more attuned to the as a service business model than Europe is. So if we look in terms of adoption, the US customers are more open to paying for something on a subscription basis. European companies are a little bit further ahead in actually developing the technology, but they're a little bit further behind in the business model. Whereas in Asia, by and large, the emphasis is still on driving down the manufacturing costs and competing on price. And in Asia, there's also a cultural resistance to as a service business model. There's much more of a buy and own rather than rent business mentality.
Makes sense. Yeah, definitely different, cultural differences and just emphasis on some of the businesses. So, all right, Kurt, another one for you. So for organizations that have started with the just collecting data rather than focusing on the outcomes, what are the recommendations you have for moving forward to a more outcome-based solution? And knowing, building physical products have long lead times, what's the strategy for iterating with a new outcome that are desired?
Yeah, so I would say you need to, so I assume then you're already in sort of production or in the field. So you want to make sure that the infrastructure and technology choices that you make allow it so you can evolve the solution with the needs of your customers. So sometimes, yes, if you have hardware that's only sensing a certain amount of information, then there's not much you can do there until you have your next version of the solution. But I also say there's other ways to get important feedback from customers and feed that into your solution as well. So you could, have ways that they can feed information back to you based on what they're seeing in the field to add more context to the solution. I think that adding more context is always valuable as you're trying to deliver outcomes in the field. And as you're iterating, what data you have, and if you really focus on those outcomes and sort of outside of your solution you have today, if you start to experiment, you can find ways to weave that into the user experience at the application layer.
Got it. Okay, good. Makes sense. Thank you. Yeah. And keep the questions coming in. We appreciate it. We had quite a few coming throughout, but yeah, keep them coming. Harold, this one's a little directed more towards you, I guess, or I guess both you could take it, but do you need to consider data privacy issues in the connected product space, Harold? I mean, what are you running into in the work you all are doing?
Yeah, so it depends on the type of data that's being collected. Europe came out with the GDPR, which has a very broad definition of personally identifiable information. It's not just the email addresses, contact information for an individual, but in some cases, if the data that you're collecting ties to an individual operator, then the data is technically defined as personally identifiable. One of the early examples of this was Rolls-Royce that came out with their hours of thrust per hours of thrust as a business model, where they instead of selling or leasing the engines, they were doing this on an hourly basis on the amount of power that's being generated. And the data that's being collected also included the individual pilot performance, because the pilot performance has an impact on the engine data. And that was initially classified by the European Union as personally identifiable information. So you have to look at the information that you collect. If it's just machine data, no issue at all. If it is anything that can be tied to an individual and how they perform their task, then it could potentially be defined as PII, and you need to comply with GDPR, and the equivalent in California came out with legislation that's very similar, and that's becoming the standard for the US as well. So again, depends on how closely the information you're collecting ties to an individual and can be tracked to an individual.
Got it. Okay. Thank you, Harold. Yeah, interesting. And obviously, yeah, different continents, different areas, the way what data and how that's managed is a little different. Question from the crowd, Kurt, is just what do you mean by AI generated insights? Like how do you mentioned it in your presentation, so yeah, curious to get some more context.
Yeah, what I'm referring to there is if you have someone who has, let's say you're looking at a data from a motor and you're looking for, or let's say a pump, and you're looking for is there a leakage, or is there a clog or something that's having performance degradation over time? If you have an expert who is looking at enough data and has an opinion on what that data means, that expert can then say, oh, I see there's an issue here, there's a gasket we need to replace or something like that. Since that if you take then what that expert knows about the system and the data, and you then feed that into AI, you can find a way to, for particular tasks, not entire roles, or it's not a solve everything type of model, but you can start to offload reasoning of data with outcomes with AI in the context of your solution. And I'm not referring to chatbots, like I'm talking about directly into the solutions that you offer, as opposed to having to dig through the information.
Got it. Makes sense. And I guess one of the questions that Kurt, since it mentions mesh, I'll have you take this, or I can even help. But you know, how does mesh fit into the experimentation process, you know, for a connected product journey?
Yeah, so we have really strong opinions on what the tech stack should be. And we've chosen a tech stack that has a lot of built-in capabilities for rapidly building applications, whether that's no code, low code, or in that space. So since we always use the same databases and tools, we can stand up that infrastructure for you and put that data there that is simulated for you, or if you're actually grabbing it from devices and you want to experiment with it, and allow you to not have to focus on making all these technology decisions, because we recognize that a solution needs to evolve and scale and be flexible. So there are some databases and tools and frameworks that differentiate themselves. So while we won't provide the, you know, on the motor or pump example, we don't exactly know why something's failing, but we can give you the right tools and ask you some questions as an outsider who doesn't know everything about the solution itself. We're sort of a good test case for a dumb end user, right, who doesn't really know anything. We need to be really guided along.
Makes sense. Yeah, I mean, we always talk about how, you know, our job is to help customers, empower them to continue to remain domain experts on their domain, and we'll focus on the IoT aspects. Okay, and then we're not going to get to all the questions. Thank you everybody for submitting them. Please, we'll take them. I think some names are associated. If not, the next slide will have a little bit of a flash of just contact info. So just Harold, one more question for you. This person put, you know, my company's kind of in an exploratory phase of IoT, starting to get things going. Where do you think, well, two-part, where should IoT live within an organization? And then the other part is, where do you typically see it living? So maybe focus on where you think it should live, and we'll focus on
where it typically lives is IT, and where it should not live is IT. So, what we prefer to see is that the company sets up, that they have a digital solutions person, a transformation, someone that's responsible for driving those digital solutions. Yeah, you want to leverage IT, but you don't want IT driving the IoT strategy necessarily. They have to be involved in the technology, but this is a business model issue driven by technology, and it should be a separate part of the organization that moves that forward. So my suggestion there is that just not IT, someplace else.
For sure. Yeah, product management. I think what we find, we often
Yeah.
delve into this, is just having a true product owner. It oftentimes doesn't matter where it lives within the organization. It's just having someone that cares about it and really is focused on, you know, the domain expertise of the business, and allowing a company like Mesh in these scenarios, or you know, your group to own their domain expertise to make it work. So, all right, we are at time. I appreciate everybody. You know, just a quick kind of thank you to everybody that, well, first, Harold, Kurt, thank you guys for taking part in this. We appreciate the time and effort that went into just prepping and answering questions. And then thank you to everyone that hopped on. Just a kind of a PS, we will send out the recording and a link here to everyone that attended. And if you had any questions that didn't get answered, please follow up to either Harold or Kurt, or even myself. We'll send contact info when we do all our messaging out. So thank you guys so much. Look for some more content from Mesh and the York Group, and looking forward to an exciting end to 2024. Thanks, everybody.